the Raspberry Pi project. Welcome to the third night of the Welcome to several nights in to the Raspberry Pi project. Basically, I've been trying to get a Raspberry Pi to control my entire imaging rig, and it's kind of been successful. It's been pretty good. I've discovered though that Altair cameras, the INDI, Indie driver on Altair cameras is really sensitive to different voltages, and on a Raspberry Pi it doesn't necessarily deliver consistent voltage when you've got multiple cameras and a mount and everything else going on. So I've had problems with the cameras disconnecting, I've had problems with the mount disconnecting, and I think all of this is related to power. But tonight is going to be a really good go at rigging the whole thing from end to end. We're going to go back on M101 and we're going to try our best to do some imaging, and we'll see where we get to. So with any luck I'll be able to get the whole thing end to end working and imaging for a whole night on a Raspberry Pi. So let's get this thing rigged. I'm fighting against the clouds a bit tonight. So we've got the Raspberry Pi there, and it's just done its slewing routine to work out the polar alignment. And I did a rough polar alignment by looking through the polar alignment scope here. And now on the screen you can see that we've got a triangle. Now that's the North Celestial Pole, and then I have to move this bright star along here and then up there to match it. So that's what I'm going to do now. So you can see here, this is my alignment star, just there. I'm going to adjust the azimuth now, and it should, so you've got to do very small adjustments, and it will jump up any second when it's refreshed. There you go. So that just jumped up, so I'm going to do it again now. Now I've got to get that star on the red dot. And the trick is to do super small adjustments, and as I'm doing this it should get to full polar alignment. There you go. So I'm very close now to the red dot. Just a tiny one now. Right, I'm now going to zoom in a little bit. So that's where we're working to at the moment. I need to just go up a tiny bit. Tiny bit more. Okay, I think I'm on the pole. So let's zoom in one more time. And I'll just scroll across. So I think that's polar aligned. I'm sure if you keep zooming in you can actually see the extent of your inaccuracies, but I think the mount is now perfectly aligned. So I'm going to lock everything off, and I think we're then good to go. I'm back inside now, and here we go. M101, you can just see the center of the galaxy there. Now I do have a great big blob of something which looks like dirt there, and a bit of vignetting around the edges, but it's working, and currently it's at 30 seconds left on this, so we'll just let this go through and we'll be able to see the next image come in. But I am very happy. I managed to go from polar alignment to slewing and focusing, and then to starting guiding, which is actually going quite well. Here we go, next image coming in. Okay, that's the next image. It's actually doing really well. Let's have a look at our guiding. Guiding is doing really well at the moment. I'm very happy with that. For this mount, that is good. So I'm not unhappy at all. And also looking back at the images that are coming in, I just go back to the image viewer. The stars are actually quite sharp. So that is good. So I'm going to leave this to run through and do some imaging. The imaging plan has just finished. Let's quickly have a look at the guiding. This is the current guiding which we've got. So we're on 2.89. Now there's a little button just up here, and if I hover over, it says manual dither. But if I click on that, okay, manual dither. Oh, I see. So that then says dithering in progress. So it's now doing dithering. But what I really want is automatic dithering. So it would be really good if it had an automatic dithering button as well. I can't quite find an automatic dithering setting on this page, which is where you'd kind of expect it to be. Oh well, I'll keep looking. So there's a dither setting here. So if I just come out of this, I'll show you where. So under the guiding tab, you go down to options, and then you have to go to dithering, and then you hit the dither button, I would imagine. If I come out of this, there you go, dither is now on. Click apply. Great, so I've now applied dithering to my image plan as well, which is brilliant. The imaging plan has finished, and now we're taking some dogs. So I've covered up the front of the scope, and I'm able to come out with a head torch now so I don't disturb the imaging session. I've kept the guiding going because I wanted to set up dithering, and the guiding is working really well at the moment. There's the Raspberry Pi at the bottom, and that's doing all of the maths for me, which is great, and the USB hub, which is currently imaging right now. So this is the rig, and it's been working quite well. I did have a big crash earlier with the Raspberry Pi, but I think I've turned off all of the sound notifications. I've basically turned off anything that can reduce its processing power, and currently it seems to be working really well. So I've got a few more darks to take, and then tomorrow morning I'll take some flats as well, and hopefully we might have an image. But because I wasn't dithering tonight, the image will probably be quite noisy, but we'll see what comes out of this. Unfortunately, that entire imaging night was lost, and it was lost for a good reason, because I didn't know that in the INDI driver, the ND driver, I had to configure it so that it was taking raw images, and as a result it was only taking 8-bit images because it was set to RGB. So I wanted to show you where that was. In KStars you go to Tools and then Ecos, and then you have to connect your profile. So I'll connect the profile, and you can see here that I've only actually got the 294C camera and the mount connected at the moment, because I wanted to show you two things on these. The ZWO camera, that was fine, that worked well. In the Altair camera here, the 294C, you have to go into Controls and then select RAW, which is this one here. If you have it selected on RGB, it will only save as 8-bit. So all of the images I took that night were saved as 8-bit. In RAW, however, it will default to the higher bit rate of your camera, so in this case it's 14-bit. The other thing is you have to save this, and this bit's really tricky. You've got to go to Options and then click Save here, and it's kind of hidden. You sort of go through the tabs and don't see the Save button, so I just wanted to point out that there's a Save button there. The other thing was, on EQ Mod, if you want to change the size of the pulses that are going to your mount, you have to go to Motion Control and then down to the guiding rate here, and you can see it's gone back to 0.5, so it's important to put that up to 0.9 for my EQ5 Pro, and then if I go back to the options I should be able to save that. So it's now saved that configuration, but I had done that before, so it's a bit strange that it's kind of forgotten that setting from before, so I'll probably have to check that every time I go into this. .130 PDS, fan-cooled Altair camera. Then we've got our ZWO guide camera there, and they are going in a sock which is here on USB 3 connections. On the Raspberry Pi I've got my EQ mod cable, my Lynx Astro EQ mod cable, which is plugged directly into the main motherboard, which is in here, and then I've also plugged the USB hub in here, which is a direct connection. And what I'm going to do is change this, because I'm going to get a light. You need a light, can't see. Okay, so we can now see what we're actually doing. I have a USB hub here, and in there I've got the main imaging scope plugged in here, and then the guide scope plugged in here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take the guide scope off, and I'm going to plug it directly into the Raspberry Pi. And the reason for doing this is because I don't want there to be any voltage drops from the USB hub by having the two cameras on the USB hub. So all that the USB hub is going to be doing is giving USB power to my main imaging camera. So in this manner I've got my guide camera, the USB hub which has my main imaging camera on, and then I've got the Lynx Astro plugged into the other USB connection there. And I'm hoping that by configuring it like this, that the power management will be better, and then the hub, the powered hub here, will be able to just provide power to my main imaging camera. There you go, you can just see Polaris in there at the moment. That's near enough for now, and I'll check on the Raspberry Pi to make sure that that's okay. So the telescope is now running, and it took almost 2 hours to get this to work, which is a real shame. Because I lost a good hour's worth of imaging time. The polar alignment, however, was brilliant. It works really well, and I was very pleased with that, so that's good, and I used the ZWO camera for that. However, my imaging camera would not connect reliably, and in the end I've actually plugged it directly. So on the Raspberry Pi I've plugged the imaging camera directly into the USB 3, and now I've plugged on the hub, just here, only the guide camera and the mount. And that was the only way I could get it to work, and I had to restart it several times in order to get everything to connect. But it's now connecting, it's running, guiding is really quite good. I mean, for this mount, it's really good, so I'm happy. Everything seems to be working, but unfortunately I can't yet say if this is all going to be really reliable. I'm going to keep going with it, I'm not going to give up. I do have some slight reservations about the reliability of the driver. That's the bit that's let me down for the main camera. But now it's working. The Altair Linux driver, this is in the indie page on their website. Just sort of halfway down it says, "This camera is very sensitive to power fluctuations. Make sure to use a 3 amp supply if the camera is connected to StellarMate." So StellarMate would be used on a Raspberry Pi, so it's the same with Raspberry. The USB speed is automatically adjusted to the lower value since USB bandwidth on Raspberry Pi 4 is limited and can cause the camera to indefinitely loop if the camera gets stuck during exposure. Check the cable, power supplies and everything. So this bit is really important if you're using an Altair camera as your main imaging camera, which is exactly what I'm doing. I think this is really important because I've now connected the Altair camera directly to the Raspberry Pi so that it's got a direct connection without going through the USB hub, and it seems to now be working. So if we go back to the Pi at the moment and I'll take a quick exposure with it, we'll be able to see, hopefully, that it's working okay. So if I just take a 1 second exposure, it is just quickly connected. There we go. So even that hasn't downloaded, and that's with a direct connection. So I'm going to stop that and see if I can actually get a live view from it. No, I can't even get a looping view. Maybe if I change the exposure time to, say, 3 seconds and try again. Yeah, great. So it's worked. So that's just a dog frame, and you can see it's looping now. So that seems to have woken it up or got the camera going again. The driver just doesn't seem to be happy on a Raspberry Pi for Altair cameras. It seems happier once you kind of wake the camera up and it gets going. But I've really struggled to get the camera to connect.